It's September 24th, 2024. Off to a hard start tonight. I had to reboot twice. The second time, lucky for me, I had started a new session last week as a backup. I actually had to use my backup. And yesterday, my cell phone started going on the blink. This is quite a coincidence to have both of those happening to me in just such a short span, because we're talking about nuclear. Everything is suspect, right? Nothing is more suspect than nuclear, of course. Let's get it a little bit off my normal routine here. So, is pro-nuclear a vicious crime against humanity? Yeah, it's a vicious crime. And that's being pretty polite, calling it a vicious crime. Do I do a trajectory on this one? Let me see what that looks like. Yeah, like that there. To give us some pizzazz instead of just fading in or whatever. We got some interesting news tonight. And so I'm going to have to replace my 7-year-old phone. And you got to have a phone to sign into my YouTube, right? So they got me backed into a corner, caught me off guard. I got to get an iPhone, I think, this time. Just obviously I can't get a new one, but I can probably get a decent one secondhand. It's harder to hack than the phone I got, right? We know they got my phone hacked, so if I got to change phones, I might as well go after it. So bear with me here now, because this, as soon as I was able to go live, I just went live, because I know time is precious for everybody, and I don't want to waste anybody's time. Two crazy stories that I want to cover right away here. And one is about solar power. And so when I talk about like hydro or geothermal or any other renewable sources, just for one moment, we're going to talk about plutonium right after. That's a horrifying story. So global solar power installations may hit 660 gigawatts this year. 660 gigawatts. The total power of nuclear is only 365 gigawatts, which is almost double the entire capacity of 80 years of nuclear in just 12 months with renewable solar power. We're only talking about solar power. We're not talking about all the other renewable energies. And the best one out there is geothermal. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. And I'm still recovering, and I wasn't doing good. I just, kind of a last minute, I decided I was going to do a show. I started coming around a little bit, but we'll get to it after, maybe at the end of the show or something. Aiming for an annual growth rate of 40% on average. So, I mean, this is unbelievable numbers we're talking about. This is just a 12-month period. 600. Imagine building 660 nuclear reactors in 12 months. I know how laughable. Anybody knows anything about this, they're laughing right now. So I'll give you time to compose yourselves and get back in the game here. So that's pretty stunning. And each year they're expecting another growth rate of 40%. That's insane numbers, because you're talking about up to 660 gigawatts this year alone. I think that's what we predicted from last year's numbers, wasn't it? It was I mean, my goodness. And if you put solar power and wind power, people say, well, the wind doesn't always blow. But it does. If you spread your wind power out over the mountains and the coastlines, like on the mountains, on the coastlines, the wind blows 24 hours a day on the mountains, right? And so if you were to put wind all along your community, just because it's not blowing in your wind blowing in your community today, it doesn't mean the wind's not blowing a little further along, further from your community. And so you can share energy over great vast distances thanks to Nikola Tesla, right? And then if you marry up solar powered with storage, there's some amazing storage technology going on, like volcanic rocks. And they're able to hold heat for months. The same thing with sand. Sand can hold temperatures, huge temperatures, for months. And they call them sand batteries. But there's also water batteries where you dig 2 aquifers or 2 big reservoirs and you just pump water to the top one. And so you're not destroying a habitat. And we have a lot of water, radioactive water on top of that. So global solar installation of 630 gigawatts to 660 gigawatts would exceed the report's high scenario of 620 gigawatts. The original report was quoting about 620 by the end of 2024. Why is anybody looking at nuclear? Nuclear is a massive disease factory. The emissions from the fuel pools at all nuclear power plants is exterminating all the species. All the reactor cores, when you take them out after a year and a half, put them in a fuel pool, are still splitting atoms. The same atoms you need to boil water for 1 million homes and businesses. So the numbers we're talking about are, we don't actually have a mathematical equation that, like, we got a lot of names for numbers, like billions and trillions, right? But we don't have a name for the amount of atoms produced in the fuel pools and released into the ecosystem because there's no containment. So this is March the 16th, and this was the cover story about Fukushima. So it's frightening that the academic community hates you this much, that they would utter words like, I'm going to show you. And what they're talking about is they're saying how the plutonium doesn't travel very far because it's heavy. And all the atoms are the same size, by the way. They're atoms. And I can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle. And so if one is just a bit heavier than another one, do you really think that's going to matter to the distance? It doesn't need jet streams to traverse the entire biosphere. About 6% of the fuel rods in Reactor 3 at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant are made from so-called mixed oxide fuels. It's actually called plutonium mixed oxide fuel. And just because it's 6% that they start out with, it's producing plutonium also. So the numbers go up exponentially by the day, which contains plutonium as well as uranium, not cesium, not iodine. You notice how they don't say cesium and iodine. And when they melt down, they're called curium. And the curium isotope, by the way, is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. And curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Check my phone again. So that's, I'm getting a weird screen, and then it might come back or it might die on me. It's died on me probably 6 times today. And it's just such a struggle to do everything. But I wouldn't have it any other way, obviously, but oh my goodness. It'd be nice if it would go a lot smoother, is all I can say. Which contains plutonium as well as uranium. And let me put it on the bigger screen just in case you're using a cell phone or a tablet, sure it's a little harder for you to read. Dennis Flory, a top safety official at the agency, pointed out that all used nuclear fuel contains plutonium. It forms naturally within the conventional uranium fuel as the uranium is bombarded by neutrons, but it's not natural. plutonium is man-made, and which means there's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. Everything with replicating cells is a very vulnerable to any kind of anthropogenic man-made radiation. And although plutonium is a long-lived emitter of radiation, it's quite heavy, so it's not likely to move very far downwind from the source. It's very subtle how they do it in the very last paragraph, right? Although plutonium is long-lived, there's 24,000-year half-life, there's 10 half-lives, and that's 240,000 years. And just let me explain to you what plutonium does to lab rats, and which are humans really now, obviously. It's quite concerning. Now they say a couple of kilograms of plutonium dispersed into the environment is enough to set an extinction level event. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds at Fukushima alone. All fuel pools are hemorrhaging plutonium, by the way, into the biosphere. And we're not talking about tiny numbers. We're talking about gigantic plumes that covers the entire planet. So this research study, 144 beagle dogs. This was Dr. Raymond Gilmedy was the lead author from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, which is a military, Navy research institute. And so they're clearly going to kidnapping beagle dogs and beagle puppies. Death from radiation occurred about 1.5 to 5.4 years after the exposures. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred about 3 years after exposure, but death could have occurred 1.5 years, not 3 years. Bone tumors in 93 dogs out of 144 were the most common cause of death. All the dogs died in short order. Lung tumors in 46 dogs, and the second most common cause of death, liver tumors, lung tumors. So how many people are hearing of bone tumors and lung tumors? Their loved ones and friends and families and community. And liver tumors occurred in 20 dogs, were the cause of death in only 2 dogs, and occurred later in the tumor. So, and dying of radiation is a nasty way to die. So these dogs suffered horrifically when they were, from the time they were injected until the times after. Tumors in these 3 organs often occurred in the same animal or competing causes of death. And these findings in dogs suggest a similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to. Now they're only acknowledging plutonium-238. The 239 was the biggest byproduct of the plutonium. There's not a big discrepancy. And it's much worse. But so when they say that these findings in dogs suggest that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans from this contamination, this radioactive poison, this biological weapon, it turns out that's actually wrong. Humans are actually 50 times less, livers are 50 times less efficient at removing the kidneys, 50 times less efficient at removing the plutonium than the animal. So the animal has 50 times more tolerance than a human does. And all the animals died. But it's worse. The same authors, the Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, Dr. Raymond Gilmedy, a disgusting parasite, I might add. Curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the radiated nuclear fuel. And so forget about alphas, betas, neutrons, gammas, x-rays, everything else. They're the significant isotope. Because they'll try to confuse you by saying they're the significant fraction of alpha. And I've noticed when I talk to people, then they make the it's just alpha. But it's not. It's the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod. The major byproduct in the irradiated nuclear fuel is the curium isotope. Now, curium isotope, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So if you took the same experiment of 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies, the deaths would be much more significant, much sooner. And so when they acknowledge, now when you say stuff like, although plutonium is a long-lived emitter of radiation, this was only 5 days after the tsunami, and we've heard this story many, many times. And so this is a wonderful example of that story, of how a top safety official at the International Atomic Energy Agency cut your throat and your loved one's throat by coming up with these statements. So it's not likely to move very far downwind from its source. This is just shocking. I think this is the plutonium model from TEPCO. Bear with me. That's a Neptunium, which decays to plutonium. But hang on, we have a plutonium model. I have a plutonium model there somewhere. There it is. So this model, by the way, is only based on 20 days to your left and 21 days to your right of radioactive fallout. It's based upon venting. It's not based upon the lost inventories from the nuclear meltdowns. Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. Fukushima radioactive fallout. Now, the reason we say it's global warming is because the plumes cover the entire planet in just a few months, typically around 20 to 30 days. And it's like an invisible snowstorm. It's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. So this is plutonium-239 dispersal. So when you read that plutonium is quite heavy, so it's not likely to move very far downwind from its source, this is from the International Atomic Energy Agency, truly the worst humans you'll ever come across. And we have no evidence there's any humans working there, to tell you the truth. They're sadistic monsters is what we're able to quantify. Plutonium-239 dispersion. North America. And this model is only based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. I got no idea what's going on here. Bear with me. Let's keep rolling anyway. Let's do the best we can. So that is a very, very, very important study and statement. And it's quite distressing that the very people that are in charge of protecting you are the first ones and the only ones typically that are out there cutting your throat. No intentions, zero intentions of protecting you. Their job is protect the nuclear industry, and if you get sick and are dying, to sell you radiation as a cure, which is going to finish you off. And so people take their loved ones to the hospital. It's very distressing because you know it's going to kill them. And there's only about 2% survival rate. Just ignore that, because what I was doing is I was just copying and pasting it to my my window with that's gotten so big over the last decade of important headlines that we need on drop of a hat. We can dip into that one, so to speak. Waste storage tanks at Fukushima Daiichi at risk of explosion. No, I left that there for some reason, because we covered that, didn't we? I'm pretty sure we covered that last week, or on Sunday. So, we kind of covered it, I think. There was a couple of stories about it, actually. Let me go to the next story, and I'm going to keep that story there, and then I'll check my last video and see if I actually did cover it. And if I didn't cover it, I'll cover it next show. Fukushima Daiichi cleans most contaminated water. Not really. May 28, 2015. So the TEPCO is unable to bring contaminated water issues under control. April 21st, 2014. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, which is their pride and joy, ALPS, had yet to function reliably. And then there's a caveat to that I need to, because I got a new session, things are a little bit blunky, but don't worry, we'll get there. New images from Fukushima Daiichi Press Tour, 2013. These images, so that's the ALPS system in April, is it? February 2013. So then if you read this story here, it's 2014, August. Oh. Yeah, August 2014. Oh, it jumped. Bear with me. It booted me down. That seems the way the night is going anyway, isn't it? Just endless problem after problem. I'm exhausted from all these years. Sometimes that catches up to me, and there's nothing I can do about it, right? We just gotta rough our way through it. There we go. Hopefully I'm back there in a second. There we go. Yeah, we're back there now. Well, that's not where I wanted to be at all. Right here? No. Right there? No. Yeah, the problem is I got a little bit too much maybe, so we'll worry about that next time. I got no idea what happened. Oh, there it is there. So, 2014, August the 9th, they were suggesting by the end of the year the ALPS system might be up and running. So you're almost 4-year anniversary, or close to the first 4th-year anniversary before they allegedly had it working, but it can't work. You couldn't filter water from a nuclear meltdown. You can't change the filters. All the atoms are the same size. Yeah, I gotta paste that right there. There we go. So the water filtration system didn't exist. It was the same thing for the Arriva system, the French system, the Curie system, the Curium system. You can't separate through chemicals or filtration atoms that are all the same size. You can't take cesium and separate it from 1,000 other isotopes, right? So originally, every nuclear scientist that's seen these two buildings knew the reactors were gone. There were no illusions, and any academic, any professor from the International Atomic Energy Agency, etc., etc. There was no illusions that the fuel pool and reactor cores were gone. So they decided just to cover it up, because you don't know any better, and they were counting on that. In fact, they were very certain, and they were right, that there was nobody going to come out. Nobody was going to come out and call them on it. So the Advanced Liquid Process System yet to function reliably in 2014 is an understatement. It still wasn't close to being running in August of 2014, let alone April. That was just the media and the International Atomic Energy Agency throwing excrement at the wall and waiting for something to stick, and then use that. So, suggesting that Fukushima can clean most contaminated water, and that was May 28, 2015. Only cesium and 134 cesium, 137 cesium with strontium-90 have been removed from certain tanks of water. So clearly, and there's more to it than that, like a never-ending lie. That's what nuclear is. It's a perpetual, never-ending. They can't write a sentence unless it's to cover up or to tell a lie. So this video is from Rupert Winfield Hayes with the BBC in 2013, where he says all the fuel pools, or all the tanks, are full. At the end of the video, I'll say that. But there's quite a lot of important stuff there from TEPCO. It's a very short video. I'm going to play that for you.
The Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So all the tanks were full in 2013. The ELP system in 2013 was just started. So there was no way to filter any water. So the tanks were so contaminated. Like if you put, let me back that up for a second. If you put, the fuel particulates, because you're pouring water allegedly over reactors that typically need 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. And what they're saying is they're pouring the equivalent of a garden hose split 4 ways, 120 tons a day or so. That's what they're, because we've covered this hundreds of times, right? Different stories included. I mean, the reactors blew up. They ejected the reactor. That's the reactor 3, the plutonium mixed oxide reactor. That's Medusa. That's the plume model you see to your left is 26 days. The plume covers the entire planet. That's reactor 4. There's 4 of these reactors and 8 fuel pools that detonated. So each building had around 9 reactor cores, and you can see it ejects it right out of the building. And because we've got a new session, I'm struggling with a few details. So if you were to put that into to the tanks, you can't go near the tanks. You can't build another tank on site. And you can't filter it. And this is why there was all this delay, so to speak, right? Because they knew it couldn't work. And so originally they were putting it in a tank. And they were claiming they were filtering it, but they didn't have a filtration system. And they were spraying half of it back on the melted reactor cores, which you can't do because it's lethal doses quite a far away from this. There's no way, even with the cement trucks outfitted with water, still can't. Because you're talking about 1 million gallons a minute. You're talking about 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks every minute. The logistics of that much, and then they're only bringing up 120 tons a day, not a minute, but a day. So when it melts down, it needs more water, not less water. And they said 620,000 tons of water, and this is important stuff. Let's go back to the big screen. I've had 2 isotopes removed. Again, this is absurd to suggest, because currently they have a million tons. So they're claiming in just 2 months they filtered over half of the water that they had in the 1,000 tanks. They had 1,000 tanks in 2013. And so this was made 28, 2015. 440,000 tons of water have now been run through the Alps. The sludge was at 100 million atoms per cubic centimeter. These are absurd numbers, by the way. And there's no way you can get close enough equipment to monitor that without getting a lethal dose. Like we're talking gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardment, beta rays, X-rays. This is all killer stuff. It goes through multiple feet of lead and melts your organs. There's no way to survive it. Even if you're running past it, your organs will continue to melt. And within a few minutes, and this one I'm going to say is very graphic, so bear with me. Once like we know this from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, once your organs are melting, a lot of Nagasaki victims were found with their pants down, or even in a squatting position where they were excreting their organs that had liquefied from the gamma shines, the neutron bombardment, the beta rays, the X-rays, the alpha shine. Fukushima actually cleans most of the contaminated water? Not really. TEPCO announces that they have cleaned most of the contaminated water of Fukushima. They began dismantling the H2 tape farms. Phone's gone nuts again. Oh, there it goes. It has not been mentioned how they will manage worker exposure doses during dismantling. It has not been mentioned how they will manage the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language, because nuclear scientists are not going anywhere near it. They're not going nowhere near it. If you try to drag these disgusting parasites to Fukushima, they would kill you with any object they can find. You could not, and typically a coward would never do that, but these particular cowards are very capable. Many of these early tanks, let the phone sit for a minute, I guess, and then I'll try it. What a disaster. Many of these early tanks held highly radioactive sludge. Like, I don't know how you can compare it. Like saying you had it's like you're a farmer and you had a whole bunch of rotten fruit. Oh, yeah, there's a bunch of rotten fruit over in in that container. This deserves incredible prominence. This highly radioactive sludge is so lethal that walking past it will melt your organs within 50 feet. There's no way to change the filter. The pipes that brings it there are so radioactive you can't step over them. They're lethal doses walking alongside of them. All the pipes in the facility are only skinny, regular, everyday pipes. And you wouldn't use that if you're actually trying to filter an enormous amount of lethal radioactive. But this is lethal doses by the liter, where you don't have to consume it or something. It's putting off so much energy by the liter, multiple sieverts of just betas, which means multiple sieverts of gammas, multiple sieverts of alphas, multiple sieverts in neutrons. So 3 sieverts radiation doses will kill a human. Even with a lot of lead on your body, you're still going to get a lethal dose from that. So imagine 10 sieverts per liter, for instance. And imagine there's 380,000 gallons of it. You're talking just in betas 1.4 million sieverts in the tanks. So if you tried to drive past a tank, that's a lethal dose. You couldn't walk past it. Even driving would kill you. You would die that day or that week or that hour. And just from the energy. You know, the buildings... The problem with this whole story, on top of that, is the buildings actually detonated. And so they dropped the reactor cores and fuel pools in some of these buildings right on the site. The entire site. And so it's not just filtration systems. This site is lethal. This is why we don't see any academics, any degenerate nuclear scientists. This is a nuclear scientist before they put their makeup on in the morning. There have been no plans announced for how they would deal with the hydrogen buildup in the filtration canisters being stored on sites that are part of the water filtration. So again, right, this is meant to perpetrate the lie. There have been no plan announced for how they would deal with the hydrogen buildup. The filtration canisters are the filters. So there's what they're making this. The incredible assertion is that they have filtered the water. The waters in these canisters are incredibly radioactive, and that the only problem is hydrogen building up in the canister. And if you introduce a spark or static or oxygen, that'll detonate, right? And typically, what they do is they fill the canister up with helium to stop it, the detonation. But the reality of it is everything is vented. All of these canisters, if they were actually canisters, we know this from other sites, right? That everything is vented. And so when they're shipping the radioactive material somewhere else, it's vented, and that's extremely important facet. And the reason it's vented because they're worried about the hydrogen explosion, because they're going to try to repackage it. So you can't contain it until it loses a certain amount of energy many, many decades down the road. Theoretically, you can put it in a cast. And these are not, the casts we're talking about are 50,000 pounds or more, not canisters. Because you're talking about gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments, beta rays. Let me see if I can find that video from the waste isolation pilot project when that melted down, which was supposed to be a pilot project, and they somewhere along the way they changed that acronym, the waste isolation pilot, or waste isolation plant. They got rid of the pilot and project and turned it into a but into a repository, the only deep geological repository on the planet. There we go. We got that. This was 2014, I think, when Whip on Valentine's Day, when Whip melted down. I'm going to have to put my headphones on. I'm going to adjust the audio. That particular video is not going to play, but the next one will. Let me get another one. I think it's this one. No, that one's not going to work. That's okay. Let's keep going. Give me a minute. I'm pretty sure I got a video there that'll work. Because the equipment I got is fairly old, like my phone. Let me try and turn my phone back on. Hopefully. Hopefully we get... So, the hydrogen buildup in the filtration canisters being stored on site that are part of... allegedly there's 4,700 of these canisters. The sludge. And we're back. I don't know what's going on. Because we played that video not that long ago, right? So let me try one more trick. Maybe I'll get lucky. So you can't filter it. That's the bottom line. Because you can't just filter out cesium-134 and cesium-137 and strontium-90, because they're the same size as the curium isotopes and the plutonium isotopes and the americium and the neptunium and the strontium and everything else. So how can you filter out? Like, if they were able to do it, we would do it at all nuclear power plants worldwide. This would be a thing, right? And it's not. And it's not because it clearly is not capable. You can't see, you have to contain everything. The water atoms are the same size as any other atom, same as the isotopes. They're all going to be the same size. I'm not getting anything on the whip. I got tons. I don't know what to make of that. Anyway, let's keep going. Not much I can do. That might be right. One more try. Alrighty. We'll just keep going with what we're going to do. Yeah, I can't believe that neither one of those videos are going to play this time for us. But everything is vented. All canisters, this is a common problem with all nuclear drums and everything else. Everything is vented. All the canisters stored at San Onofre, for instance, are all vented. And the scary thing about society is we let nuclear academics near our children, our loved ones, and friends and families. The Nuclear Regulatory Agency, we always refer to as the non-regulatory agency, said earlier last week that these canisters are producing hydrogen at levels that could lead to an explosion. So this was meant to make you believe that the filtration system worked. That's all that story was meant to do. Yeah, it works, but they got to worry now about the hydrogen, right? And then if, let's just say it did work, but what happens now if you have a hydrogen explosion? Well, you can't get near all the canisters, so eventually they all explode. This is why the tanks are all empty. If you have a leak, you can't get back on the site, so eventually all the tanks leak. You can never get back on, not leak, but lose their inventories. Because they even got me saying leaks. You know, my heart goes out to the victims, clearly. I remember it vividly. And I remember when they first said nuclear power plant, it was in trouble. And I remember the I've watched many, many, many videos on the tsunami over the years, post-Fukushima. It's a very heartbreaking thing. So I can understand that most people are not aware of the nuclear meltdowns because it's very dramatic. Chiba mayors request radioactive waste storage for the 8th time. Chiba mayors. And Chiba is right alongside of Tokyo. Mayors from 5 cities in Chiba, this was December 23rd, 2018, require for the 8th time the central government deal with the high radioactive waste in their cities. They can't get rid of the sediment from the water filtration in Japan because it's so radioactive, which means all the pipes are radioactive, all the washing machines are radioactive, and everybody that's in the homes drinking that water is radioactive and continue to bioaccumulate it. This is why we see so many horrific statistics on health issues and deaths in Japan in particular. Like 865,000 extra cancers from the first year. Not everybody has health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. Nuclear is they've got so many scams running. It's quite fascinating in one way. If there was a special prosecution team went after the nuclear industry, they would be mortified. Just a couple of days ago, we seen Microsoft. They were going to reopen 3 Mile Island, right? They're going to spend $1 billion and refurbish 3 Mile Island's reactor. And they're going to fire that thing up to run the artificial intelligence data centers, or artificial intelligence itself is more like it, right? Imagine, this is as dirty energy as we've ever had and will ever have is going to be the anthropogenic man-made nuclear. Imagine you have a meltdown at one of these facilities that are running these big data centers. Just the public relation backlash they're going to have to commit to for many years to downplay that. Well, I guess not a big deal because look what he's just done with Fukushima for 13 years. It's stunning. It's stunning. The scams and the propaganda, it's just stunning. And that's why these time machine headlines are so great. They're so important because you get the original cover story right from the lunatic's mouth, right? Yeah, the crew of Ronald Reagan was within a kilometer of Fukushima itself. And they've taken the boat, the USS aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan, 3 different times into dry dock or into refit, so to speak, post-Fukushima. And they grinded down everything because of the radiation, trying to get the numbers to come down. I mean, it's embedded into the entire ventilation system. And by proxy into everything else, right? They had to change 14 helicopter engines because they were so radioactive. When you fired them up, you would radiate everybody within 1,000 feet. And the bathrooms were all, because everybody, they were breathing in so much radiation. I mean, all of their watches stopped working at the same time on the ship. You're talking about 5,500 people's watches stopped working because there was so much radiation in that plume that they drove right straight through. And the captain, of course, had left the ship and flew up to the American military base, and the second in command, the first officer, I guess. There's so much nasty stuff, and then everybody was denied. And they still deny that these victims were irradiated. Let's get back after this one first. mayors in 5 cities in Chiba, which is right alongside of Tokyo, 20 kilometers from Tokyo. For an 8th time, the central government deal with the high levels of radioactivity, and much of the waste consists of contaminated soil, plant matter, and dry sewage sludge and incinerator ash, but also sediment from the water filtration facilities. And, if you're incinerated ash, low numbers were at 70,000 atoms of cesium-137 per kilogram, and it's quite convenient to only include cesium. It's absurd to suggest that all the other isotopes are not there. And so 80 years of lying to you, that's the hole they dug. And they got to keep that lie going. They can't slowly come out and tell you the truth, because humans will actually work it out pretty quick. In Japan, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. So it's enough to do... 30 million one-ton bags is enough to wrap the entire planet with that... with either one of these highways, right around the entire planet, at least once. 30 million one-ton bags, which was only 3%. So you need to filter the air coming out of Japan, let alone the water or anything else. We've contaminated the entire planet with radioactive fallout. The French version of the plume model was based on 8 days. This was an updated model. And this was 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic centimeter of air. You can see it's a continuous plume. The plume never stops coming out and then becomes a continuous plume within 30 days. This one model is based on 31 days. A continuous plume covering the entire planet. This is the French government. And their study was on cesium-137. So it's the equivalent of an invisible snowstorm. So a snowstorm starts in Japan, and over 30 days later, the whole planet is a snowstorm. The snow never melts, the snow never goes away, and it never stops snowing for millions of years. And now turn that into radiation, because you can't perceive it. You can't see it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. Much of the contaminated soil is stored in empty lots. There's 150,000 sites of the soil. It's 30 million one-ton bags. It was 2019. They said they had 105,000. I'll dig it up for you in a second here. Yeah, 105,000. There's a couple of caveats to this story, so bear with me. Let me bring a few in there for you. Here we go. I mean, they're growing food right alongside of one-ton bags of radiation in the nuclear wasteland where no one's allowed to live, and then they're selling it. So, plane passing the parcel with Fukushima, 30 million tons of radioactive waste. And so they were talking about as the bags deteriorate after 3 years, meaning the 30 million one-ton bags that deteriorate after 3 years had to be repackaged after 3 years. So when you say, because they say 30 million one-ton or 30 million tons of radioactive waste will eventually be moved to, and this was 2016. But it's actually bags they're talking about. 30 million one-ton bags. 30 million of that. And that Fukushima contaminated soil, there was currently 105,000 sites, storage sites. A lot bigger than that, like this. 105,000 sites, like that, really. Now, there's only, at best, 1,000 pictures, so I used artificial intelligence to create another 3,000 plus pictures so far. And we got to create 146,000 more pictures so that we can articulate the pictures we don't have. And so in 2019, there was 105, but in 2016, it was 150,000 sites of one-ton bags. I mean, they're insane. They're growing food in a nuclear wasteland. Damn phone. Parts of Chiba received unexpected levels of contamination. Southerly winds at the time of some of the larger releases of nuclear meltdowns caused contamination of parts of Chiba and Tokyo. So Chiba and Tokyo basically same. Tokyo metropolitan Tokyo is 36 million people. Chiba is just 20 kilometers away, but when you're talking about such a big, vast, it just didn't get sucked up by Tokyo yet. But it generally is part of Tokyo, right? The Daiichi Elementary School, which is also in Chiba, in 2011 had 4 million atoms square meter of cesium. Now, so what about the uranium, plutonium, americium, curium, etc., isotopes? And 20 kilometers, there was another spot at 10 microsieverts at an elementary school. Now, you don't count one in atoms and the next one in microsieverts. When you're far away from the nuclear meltdown, you count it in physical atoms, because that's how it got there, was radioactive fallout. So the minute you see anything to do with microsieverts or millisieverts, and it's insane to suggest there's only 10 microsieverts, by the way. And the problem is they're shipping the food worldwide. Places and hours away from a nuclear plant can find themselves dealing with high radiation levels and contamination due to bad timing and a change of wind. Bad timing and a change of wind. I mean, 30 million one-ton bags. That quantifies that there was a catastrophic release. And that the reactor cores and the fuel pools were at the top of these 19-story, 65-meter, 190 feet reactors. And this is just 2 of the 4 reactors. But this is very visual. I would hope that you don't have to be an engineer or an architect or anything to appreciate that the buildings are completely gone. They're just stubs, little stumps that are left, that were only left there to fool you, manipulate you, and deceive you, and coerce you into being complacent. I think they've done a wonderful job at that, didn't they? For being scumbags. That's reactor 1, by the way, another reactor. So you got reactor 3 to your left, reactor 4 behind me. They detonated, lost their inventories, which is around 9 reactor cores in each building. That's reactor 1. And that's the size of the reactors you can see right there. And so what made all that dust plume? That was the uranium plutonium atomizing and aerosoling, right? Shugane hits Fukushima. It's basically no method or no way to do something. So they have no method or no way to deal, hits Fukushima. It's an interesting way to frame that narrative. The notion that it can't be helped was cited by the NRA when confronted with yet another radioactive release to the ocean. I mean, the buildings don't exist anymore. There's no way to contain it. You can't contain something that's mostly gone. I know it sounds crazy to a nuclear scientist, but no, you can't actually contain something that's almost all gone. You can't contain this long after it happens. It doesn't work that way. And that's a shock to the pro-nuclear nut jobs. Bear with me. This model of radioactive fallout, for instance, is based on 20 days, the 31st of March 2011. I think that was the Xenon 133, which in Washington, I'll show you where that's too. So you got some kind of reference. So Washington is up right around here, right here probably. That was at 450,000 times detection levels, which meant there was multiple millions per cubic meter. Per square meter of ground. So this is a continuous plume from Japan. And this is only 20 days. So it's like an invisible snowstorm or radioactive fallout, but this stuff never goes away. Some isotopes might decay, but all the other ones are in this same plume, right? The notion that it can't be helped was cited by the NRA when confronted with yet another radioactive release to the ocean at the disaster site. Yet another release. Well, how can you contain it? You can't put that genie back in the bottle. How are you going to get this genie back in the bottle? Now, they faked it. They built a building in a cover and claimed that everything was perfect inside of it. But it doesn't work that way. And I apologize that these stories are so difficult because they are, right? So the building blows up, the reactor cores are at the top of the building, and so is the two fuel pools. There's nothing left. I mean, the guts are hanging out of the building. People can live in denial all they want. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that in a second here. But see the sides of the buildings? These are the guts are hanging out. See, the guts, there, and what you're looking over there is the elevator. This is a remote control crane. That's the reactor, the bottom or top part of the reactor. That's the bottom part of it. And that's the 300,000 pound cover. And that is supposed to be up here when my finger is to now. Well, higher than that, up a bit right here. Now, they were changing the fuel in this building. But typically, when you change the fuel, you're only changing 1/3 of the fuel at best, which meant the reactor core had 2/3 of a reactor core. But we know the fuel pools, there's two of them on the top of the buildings, they're stuffed over capacity because you don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone in Japan. Now, the NRC claimed that since there isn't already a Pacific law to address that, they can do nothing. So there was no law in 2015 to release radiation into the ocean. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is supposed to has the authority to create the law, and are the only ones with the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation, because the Diet in Japan, which is like the Canadian Parliament or the American Congress, doesn't have, or the British Parliament, they don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. And so these little tidbits are so important. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, Congress. Here we go. Let me bring up the test story. This was a guy who tried to order a protester, ex-candidate, to plead guilty to seeking nuclear material, but won't get prison under a new deal. And what happened was his lawyers, he was originally charged with attempting to possess radioactive material as a terrorism charge, a nuclear terrorism charge, because he's trying to get hold of polonium. But what he said was he was trying to kill himself, make it look like the government killed him, using a substance that's difficult for anybody but the government to get their hands on. But his two lawyers, Bugney and Myers, filed a series of motions to dismiss the indictment against Ryan, asserting that the nuclear terrorism charge under which he was charged is unconstitutional. It was unconstitutional because Congress in the United States lacked the authority, or Canada, or Great Britain, or Australia, New Zealand, or any other English-speaking country that we know, or any nuclear country, that the government lacks the authority to criminalize poisoning with radioactive substances, and that only the regulatory agencies have the authorities to do it, and they aren't doing jack. So the air samples, when you say the NRC claims there isn't a Pacific law to address dumping into the ocean. That was 2015. So they can't do nothing. But claiming that they can contain it in 2011, July the 18th, the air samples taken in Tokyo were 270 times more contaminated. And again, typically they're only going to acknowledge cesium-130, which is a nasty isotope. But they're only going to acknowledge cesium-137 gamma. They're not going to acknowledge any of the other emitters. And this is completely on it. These people should absolutely unequivocally lose their degree when they use that as a quantification. The global weapons follow peak. So recent rainwater from the plant was found to exceed the legal limit of contamination for the planned release to the ocean. Again, like when you look at the buildings, there is no containment. There's no containment. You can't contain it. It's already ejected for a very long time, since the first week. This is the first week this damage was done. Now, the buildings looked like this in 2013 when they stripped down the remains of the detonations of these buildings. So officially, though, the building to your right, behind me, the official story is it looks like this right there. That's the official story. And that that's Rupert Winfield Hayes, he is claiming he's above the fuel pools in the red, above that, looking down on top of them. So he has to be way up in the building to look down on the fuel pools, which are at the top of the buildings, and the fuel pools or the buildings is actually gone. It's just a stump left. So your diet in Japan, your government in Japan, the Congress in America, the parliaments in Canada and Australia, Great Britain, are all nuclear countries, right? And the government doesn't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation, because if it was illegal to poison you with radiation, they couldn't murder you and your loved ones in the hospitals with it, right? Typical solution is to try to divert the runoff into the port rather than letting it flow directly into the sea. So the port is the sea. Like boats come and go, barges come and go freely. There is no containment. So suggesting that they can run it into the port, which has it's impossible to contain it. Let it flow directly into the sea. And you can't direct it because it's lethal doses. And the homeless are the most vulnerable of society. That's who's working there. And they're typically, not always the case, but they're typically the most uneducated, the most disenfranchised, the least incentivized. And they'll give them and we got stories of them giving $3,000 to $7,000 for the homeless or the destitute or the victims of society or the immigrants who don't know any better or can't speak the language, to walk into certain areas of the plant. And then they say, we'll pay you tomorrow, but that person will always die later that day. If he dies, then he knows it's still too radioactive to go over there. We got quite a few bizarre stories on top of that. Typical solution to try to divert runoff into the port. Well, first off, the radiation covered the entire planet. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags in Japan. So every time it rains, you have the cyclones in Japan, you're having enormous releases into the biosphere and the oceans. The whole country is radioactive. And the radiation radiates other objects. So the radioactive pollen will wherever it lands will cause, it's no longer natural, it's man-made, so it's pulsing energy. And it can infect, per se, other objects. If it lands on a leaf, if a radioactive leaf lands on another leaf, it can radiate that, or on the ground there's the biota underneath, that becomes irradiated. And because the time is so much for so long, Tepco didn't mention the port does still have water exchange with the sea, as it's not fully sealed off yet. Well, you can't seal off the port, and they never did. Let me see if I can find you a quick picture. I'm pretty sure I can. I find it right here. And the only way to describe these people are as lunatics. The whole nuclear industry is what I'm talking about. There you go, I got the port. So you see the port up there? You can't seal that off. Can't get any other ships to come in if you seals it off. It has to be quite deep because these are enormous facilities. Apparently updating the existing law to deal with the contaminated rainwater leaks, calling it a leak is insane, would take a lot of time, so the solution is to do nothing. You would have to build a 100-foot wall around Japan and then put a roof on it, and then the hydrogen buildup would cause Japan to explode, I believe, right? These are crazy videos, pictures. You get these people allegedly walking around. And what are they doing? Everybody looks like they're... The idea, like the story was there were 7,000 people on the site every day. 6,000 was working on the tanks. That's the official story for many years. Even though all the tanks were built in 2013. And this was to make people complacent. This is just a cover story. Now, we hounded them, I can't remember what year it was, 2018 maybe, 2017. We hounded them for a week and a half or something about the paper suits. Like, what are they doing with all these paper suits? And then they came out with a story, and we covered it, of course, that they burnt 7,000 paper suits every day in the incinerators on site. So even if you did have 7,000 people, the paper suits, for starters, can't protect jack shit at a nuclear meltdown. They're literally the worst thing you can wear. And so-called Tyvek suits are there too. But the majority of suits were painter's suits, like you would go down to your hardware shop and buy for $7, $8 to wear while you're painting a room or something. And so the theory was it'll stop radiation from getting on your clothing, so you don't have to throw your clothing away every day. And then, like, the whole story is insane because the paper suit can't protect you. So there's not a nuclear scientist or nuclear academic on the planet would go there anyway, but they'll never go there with a paper suit. Neither would the International Atomic Energy Agency. A paper suit has no ability to protect you from gamma shots, X-rays, neutrons, or anything else. But we do believe the majority of these pictures, and there's a lot of these types of pictures, there's nothing to do there. Tanks were built a long time ago. You have two incinerators. They built a new incinerator on site. 350,000 atoms a kilogram in the straw, rice straw, and more over the limit. 220 atoms of cesium's average food consumption. So you can't just... And cesium is a gamma emitter. Cesium pulses energy around 600 feet. These are absurd numbers, just at 220. But 350,000 atoms a kilogram in the straw, there's no way that these numbers could be as low as 220. So how much uranium is there? How much plutonium is there? How much americium, neptunium, strontium? The very long list of these isotopes are going to be in that food, right? And a lot of this food was shipped to Canada. 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures. We should find a picture of that. Because we marked it on a map so people can appreciate how big of an area we're talking about. For a decade, there was 55 countries banned the food from half of Japan. There we go. And Canada removed all restrictions after 93 days. So they were they couldn't ship the food anywhere, only to Canada. And so now the majority of people have health issues. And because a lot of people think, well, I don't eat Japanese, but it's repackaged in other countries, is produced into ready-made edible products, and then assimilated into your food supply. It's amazing what they can do with rice and rice flour, for instance. Deadly prefectures, and so 1480, this is half the country. These are big prefectures. Were banned by 55 countries. And I mean, they're so insane. They're in a nuclear wasteland growing food right alongside of 1 ton bags of radiation. They got to go through a bunch of abandoned cities and communities. They got to pass millions of 1 ton bags to get to their job. And they're very close to the nuclear meltdowns. Because the industry, the nuclear, and the lie was immediate. The propaganda and the lie was immediate. If they picked up 20% of the topsoil in Japan, they could make a highway like this right around the entire planet multiple times of 1 ton bags. And they only cleaned up, and which is not, it doesn't work. You can't really clean it up. Reichsstraßen was 3% of the land of Fukushima Prefecture, but the food was, Fukushima Prefecture was the only prefecture with 1 ton bags of radiation, and they can't get rid of, I know in 2011 there was one city with 50,000 1 ton bags of sediment from the water filtration facilities that was so radioactive they couldn't get rid of. You got to leave. You got to run away from that place. Many, many people did, certainly. But not enough. Much of what was tested was over 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. And that's Date City. And the nuclear's out. No, it's like a banana and a potato chip walking in the sunshine. They got 80 years of regurgitation. They go to school, get incredible degrees. The media will immediately hire the pro-nuclear inbreeds, in particular, because they got lots of uses for the crazies, right? And same thing with the politicians. I mean, they're out there telling you it's like a banana for 80 years. And clearly this got nothing to do with potassium. And when you do the comparison of potassium, which is what the banana is, let me show you that documentation. Piece of cake. So it's quite convoluted story on top of that. If you don't know, it's very difficult to navigate the deception. 1 becquerel is an atom disintegration per second, 1 atomic. So an atom pulses energy every second. So never think of it as just, it's not a disintegration, it's a detonation almost at the speed of light. So calling it a disintegration is another way to think, oh, well, it's disintegrating, so it doesn't really matter, but it's not. That pulse of energy wrecks your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells. Your body has to repair that every second, too, and attack the source. So a curie is 37 billion. So a gram of cesium is 88 curies, 88 times 37 billion, so 4.5 trillion or something. So natural occurring radionuclides in food, like potassium in a banana, are 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram. 71 10 millionths. So if you had to pick up a transport truck, 60,000 pounds of bananas, you can live there your whole life and you won't get any dose at all from radiation. If you had a pickup load of cesium-137, when you got within 1,000 feet, you would drop dead. All was found in Tochigi Prefecture. These are big prefectures, and they're part of that ban, and they're actually up right here. They're fairly close to Tokyo and Guma, and they're not that far from Nagano. They're a long ways away from Fukushima. Fukushima's at the top of the page, right? So huge numbers, far, far away on the earth per square meter. This industry worships evil for a living. This extremely high finding shows that a cesium beef outbreak of the summer happened. Outbreak. No, this is symmetrical throughout the whole country. And this is what they do. They worship nuclear. And now they worship the one-ton bags. Cesium beef. I actually blew up laughing when I read that. When I read cesium beef outbreaking. It's not funny. It's the gallows laugh, right? It's very serious stuff we're talking about. She is very serious. When you look at that, that's the future. You're going to need 1 billion robots to clean up just the nuclear, to clean up the nuclear nightmare that we got. That we got created over, I mean, what they dumped already into the oceans and into the estuaries and streams and the rivers. It shows how one seemingly minor mistake can have incredible consequences for the food supply and for farmers. There's still no plan for disposing of all the rice straw. They got 30 million one-ton bags of radiation from topsoil they picked up in just 3% of the land of a single prefecture. But clearly that prefecture should pick up 30 billion one-ton bags, because those numbers per kilogram are higher than the 100,000 a kilogram that they were putting in the one-ton bags at Fukushima prefecture. Because that's the same stuff that they already filled up 30 million one-ton bags. I guess they ran out of one-ton black bags. What's interesting also is that every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. This is just a depiction. I got tons of real ones there. And that's how I kind of build my pictures. I'll give me a big farmer's field and put a nuclear power plant in it, because that's natural. All nuclear power plants, except for a few, are surrounded by farms. I'll show you some real pictures, actually, in a second here. And then you stack up millions of one-ton bags of radiation. Lots of times it'll reject it, but eventually you'll get it to work. It's the strangest thing, really, because if you're honest and you look at how nuclear really works, you have some moral dilemmas, right? Why are all nuclear power plants surrounded by one-ton bags or by farms? I screwed that up, did I? There we go, hang on. And this is one of the most frightening things that I discovered, because I started aggregating pictures of nuclear power plants. And so I spent the whole day trying to get aerial shots. And so I would look up individual plants, and then I would try to find aerial shots of it. Health physicists in the United States worried about inhaling hot particles from Fukushima, either uranium, plutonium. But wait a second. The International Atomic Energy Agency told us on March 16, 2011, that plutonium was heavy and couldn't travel very far. When the reality of it is, they're all the same size. So if one isotope can make it, all the other ones absolutely, positively, unequivocally will, because they don't travel alone. Concern rising at Fukushima plant. 16,000 workers have quit. Severe working conditions were blamed. Fukushima plume model was 1 million becquerels over the west coast. This was the xenon 133 or krypton 85. I can't remember. Rain with 20 million atoms, or even worse, particles. And Chris Sarkozy from the University of Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia, suggested it was equal to I think it was 10 becquerels per liter. Now, he got $6 million a year from the nuclear industry. He put it as a disclosure in the same presentation. But each particle is worse by orders of magnitude than the actual atom. So you're talking 30, 40 million pulses of energy every second from per liter. But there was supporting documentation of my assertions right there that, because we know the ratio of iodine 131 is 100 to 1 for, or 31 to 1 for iodine 129. And it's 10 to 1 for 132, 30 to 1 for iodine 133. And the 132, 133 iodine, by the way, are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating a thyroid gland than that freaking phone gone again. I can do the time over here, actually. So the 132, 133 iodine 131, which travels, 131 is nasty for ionizing and radiating the thyroid gland. But there's 10 times more iodine 132, 30 times more iodine 133, 31 times more iodine 129, which is 15 million years. So you're talking about saturating the thyroid gland of every human and every species. And so the keystone species are going to disappear first, like the spiders. Am I allowed to say spiders on YouTube, I wonder? Piece of shit. So why is every farm surrounded by, or why nuclear plants surrounded by farms? Because that's the best way to kill you. It's not an accident. And New York Times acknowledged that radiation small doses could actually be disproportionately worse. Disproportionately worse. It says where doses spread out over time might be more dangerous than doses given all at once. Well, the radioactive fallout in North America, and I just showed you that, right? 220 million atoms in North. That was a study of Ottawa, Canada, by the way, for people that are in denial. And this was one from the West Coast. These are catastrophic, unprecedented numbers, never seen before. And that when they talked about terrorists doing dirty bombs, nobody ever suggested that these types of numbers can manifest. And so the crazies raised acceptable levels for iodine by 75 times higher than the batshit lunatic World Health Organization did. And then irreversible heart damage for children with 50 atoms a kilogram of cesium-137. And you don't need, Fukushima superseded that by incredible numbers. But just eating food from these nuclear power plant areas, and America had 100 nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. It's just such a frightening industry. They didn't take into account with that study, by the way, all the other isotopes. And to me, that's unconscionable. We're going to pick up there tomorrow night. Chaos breaks out at the Fukushima food meeting. Stop right here. I didn't even think we were going to get a stream in at the rate everything was going. And let me get rid of this so I don't repeat this on the next show. And just to recap, global solar power installation is expected to hit 660 gigawatts this year. This is incredible numbers. Is pro-nuclear a vicious crime against humanity? Hi, everybody. Hugs for everybody. I hope everybody's doing good tonight. I'll see everybody tomorrow night, hopefully. I'm going to end the poll. Thank you, everyone. And I got so many stories now that I haven't got to, like folders full of absurd amount of stories. The nuclear's gone crazy. And one of the interesting stories the other night was because of 3 Mile Island was put into the equation now, right? Speculation. The nuclear industry blew that so far out of proportion that the stocks of the uranium miners in Australia have rose by 11, 12, 14%. So that means they're out there robbing vulnerable investors based on a single nuclear power plant coming online, maybe, perhaps, who knows for sure, somewhere far into the future. They turned out, and that was the story that they quoted as justification for the rise in stocks. So for goodness sakes, please never buy stocks in the nuclear industry. My goodness, that's outrageous. It's outrageous. And the only good news was renewable energy, and just a single type of renewable energy, solar power, on its own, not counting all the other renewables, is 660 gigawatts in a 12-month period. How can nuclear compete? And the prices drop down to just ridiculously cheap, and every year it drops even more. We're going to play one of James's songs. I'll put a link in the description, but there's one in the chat too, to his latest remix that he's got into a contest. And we'll catch everybody on the next show. You have a great night. Hugs for everybody. Take care, folks.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford's show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd